the phenomenon of farm murders needs to be taken to the courts under the broad heading of crimes against humanity.
It's been 2 weeks since my discussion with Errol Naidu, who serves as director on the board of the Rescue South Africa Civil Rights Alliance, and who informed us of the Alliance's plans to take the South African government to court for crimes against humanity. Let me say that again. Crimes against humanity. This will be my second discussion on this topic, and my guest is Professor Andries Raath. He is an emeritus professor of public law, history and legal philosophy at the University of the Free State, renowned for his extensive scholarship on reformed political resistance theory and historical theology, and obviously as a board member of the Rescue South Africa Civil Rights Alliance, which is why I'm talking to him today. Welcome to the program, Professor Raath.
Thank you, Johan. It's a privilege to be with you here.
So you're an expert in constitutional law, legal philosophy, and Afrikaner history. I particularly noted that for myself, and in particular the Anglo-Boer War. Now here's just a fun question to start with, and I think it's part of the discussion today. What in our history, Professor, do you think most defines our identity? Not in my name, nie in my naam nie. What in our history most defines our identity, do you think, as a nation?
Johan, identity is a complex issue. I think, first of all, there's a very clear religious focus and the spiritual commitment of our people, I think, that stands foremost. And secondly, there is also a distinct cultural profile of reflected in the being of our people, which also contributes to a specific cultural historical identity profile. And thirdly, I think there is a very clear commitment to liberty, similar to other nations that have also come into being along similar lines as our nation. For example, America, Australia to a certain extent. And I would say those are the hallmarks that identify our people as a separate entity.
Okay, let's start our discussion with the mission of Rescue South Africa. How would you describe, in your words, the mission of Rescue South Africa, the Rescue South Africa Civil Rights Alliance, with specific reference to the intent to take the South African government to court for crimes against humanity?
It is an initiative supported by legal activists and professional people over a broad spectrum who are concerned about what is happening in South Africa. South Africa is experiencing a demise in many respects, economically, also legally and ethically, but more important so, we are concerned about the fabric of our country's commitment to humanity being eroded and also threatened as a result of ANC-led government's management of our country and the political direction it is moving in.
And how do you describe the mission?
It means that first and foremost, we wish to use the legal mechanisms to bring the South African government to meet its constitutional obligations. And secondly, also to meet its obligations under international law. So we are appealing to the rule of law as it should function in a constitutional democracy.
I understand what you're saying. This is the question that I get. It's about the framing. It's about the terminology. It's about exactly those words, crimes against humanity. That's a huge charge to make. The question that I get is the framing of this case that you're supposed to want to take to the South African court, is that not too large, too ambitious?
Indeed, it is a huge project, but we tackle this step by step. And crimes against humanity cover an area that extends well beyond the traditional assault on life or murders, exterminations, enslavement, deportations in the international sphere, to persecutions against identifiable groups or collectivities. And we take this step by step as we prepare, and our legal teams do their research and then take the necessary legal steps to bring this to court. Now, the issue regarding children's rights, I think, have reached a stage where that particular case will probably be the first to be put on record in the courts.
Yeah.
But after that, I think we will also be in a position to decide whether we take the issue of farm murders or then the race-based laws as the next step in the projects of the Civil Rights Alliance.
You are basing the crime against humanity case on 4 pillars. The pillars are children's rights, race-based laws, freedom and security, that's where you are particularly involved with, and socio-economic rights. Those are 4 different pillars. The question I also asked to Errol to explain to me is there one case that you call this is the crime against humanity case, or are there 4 specific legal cases that you will be introducing to South Africa's courts? And as I got it from Errol, that the culmination of that could amount to the concept of crime against humanity. Is that how I'm supposed to see it?
Johan, I think 2 important aspects must be borne in mind. The first is that crimes against humanity cover a spectrum of actions by governments or individuals acting against or transgressing the norms of international law. But of course, they are also interrelated. For example, crimes against humanity in the form of persecution could also be closely associated with, and is indeed in South Africa linked to farm murders. So we must bear in mind that crimes against humanity is not one rubric of actions only, but could be diverse actions related or not that directly related to one another, and could be taken to court separately.
When you file the case against the South African government for failing in their obligations towards our children's rights, do you connect the name, the terminology of crimes against humanity to that case? And the same thing, when you file your case based on the pillar of race-based laws in South Africa, when you file that case, that would be, I would imagine, a case dealing with black economic empowerment, etc., etc. In other words, government not fulfilling its obligations towards equity in terms of our labor laws or whatever the case might be. Will that also have with it tagged on it as part of crimes against humanity?
No, let's say the protection of children's rights is a separate broad category or separate issue that would be brought under the broad heading of crimes against humanity. And that would be a clear example of an area or a theme which resorts under the broad category of crimes against humanity, but it is a big issue on its own. So I would think that as soon as that has been prepared and all the work has been done, that should go to court as a manifestation of the government's not meeting its obligations under the constitutional provisions, for example, Section 28, but also under international law. So that would be one instance of a crime against humanity.
Crimes against humanity are any of the following acts: murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, imprisonment, torture, rape, or other inhuman sexual violence, persecution, enforced disappearance, apartheid, or other inhuman acts of similar character. And here comes the most important line for me: when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. So there are two things that are important there. It's about part of a widespread systematic attack, and most importantly, with knowledge of the attack. I go back to my core question. Isn't that going to be the systematic nature, the intentional nature of these crimes that you are accusing the government of, that will become your biggest challenge here?
Johan, yes, of course we need all the evidence in order to prove the various elements of that crime. But we must take note of a few aspects which is clear enough to pursue this avenue of prosecuting crimes against humanity in the form of farm murders, and the extent that it is being perpetrated in our country. And I may refer to a recent report by a delegation of the Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor of the American Department of International Affairs, who recently returned from a visit to South Africa and reported that these crimes are not ordinary crimes. I think that is the first point we must take note of. The delegation found that rural attacks, particularly those on farms, reflect a clear pattern, namely the gruesome nature of these attacks and murders. In some documented instances, reports describe the victims being brutally tortured or killed without stealing any belongings from the victims. Now, we know in the ordinary parlance, speaking of crimes generally in South Africa, this is an outstanding trait or feature of almost 90+% of crimes committed in our country, namely that theft is one of the main elements, but not necessarily so in farm murders. For example, earlier this year, a man was hit with a machete. In another incident, an elderly woman was assaulted and stabbed multiple times, and in both instances, no theft was committed. And of course, please note also the brutality accompanying both these attacks. So these attacks are not motivated by poverty necessarily, according to the delegation. And then furthermore, their findings, I think, is also of importance for purposes of this point, reported that violent crime is rampant in South Africa, but that rural attacks, especially on farms, display this brutal nature to the point where victims are burnt with hot water, where they are dismembered, and that the benefit that the attackers get is only minimal. So the brutality as an outcome or a reflection of a particular mental attitude, I think that comes out in many of these cases. So this delegation found that these are not ordinary crimes, and that these crimes um, are not regarded with the necessary commitment by the South African Police Service, or for that matter, by our government. And we could talk on this later. But the point is that also accompanying these attacks, we had instances where the racial motivation was predominant. For example, singing "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer" while victims were being stabbed, and in other instances, graffiti in praise of leaders who supported "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer" were painted on farmhouses before the owners were brutally attacked. And in spite of this, as the American administration pointed out by mouth of President Trump earlier this year, many South African leaders refrain from rejecting these songs, and these songs actually appeal, as we can see from the instances I've referred to the perpetrators of these murders.
People that will respond in the following way, and this is how the response that I've gotten here, and I think I mentioned this to Errol Naidu as well. Let's just talk for one moment about the "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer" Julius Malema song as a motivational force for these crimes. Sure, you know as well as I do that I think AfriForum has taken Malema to court now 3 times for this song, singing that song, and making exactly the claim that you've just made now. But sure, you also know that in all 3 instances, the court has rejected the claims of AfriForum. And as far as my own personal research, because this came about in my last discussion of Errol Naidu as well, it will point to me as a researcher. What I've uncovered so far is one reference of one perpetrator who makes some admission post him being in prison that the song might have influenced him. That's not real science we're talking about if we want to link the song specifically to the farm attacks. That's one part of it. The other thing is we talk about numbers here. You said to me, you sent me an WhatsApp last night, and I got the impression from the WhatsApp that you don't want to talk about the numbers of the killings that are taking place on our farmers. But we cannot not talk about the numbers. And I had a look at those numbers. The research will show us, and I want to put this to you because once again, it's the strength of your case will depend on obviously these things, these statistical facts. 12 murders so far this year in South Africa on farms. 77 farm attacks this year, according to South African police. We talk about 12 farm murders. We talk about 77 farm attacks. At the same time, we talk about an average of 27,000 murders in South Africa on a yearly basis. That's what people will say to you here, is that farm murders comprises 0.4% of all murders in South Africa. How do you argue your case if you're confronted with that statistical reality?
Johan, it is very important when we talk about statistics that it is properly contextualized.
Mm-hmm.
The chances that you will be killed on a farm is 8 times higher than being killed in a town or a city in South Africa, and 76 times higher than murder in countries like Australia and elsewhere. So although we talk about lower numbers in terms of, let's say, the national impact of murders and violent crimes, it is clear that the farming community is particularly targeted and susceptible to farm attacks and to farm murders, which means that this is within the context of the overall crime statistics. a crime which should be prioritized by government and making available additional resources as they've done with other priority crimes to combat this.
Yeah, yeah.
So the farming community is particularly susceptible, and may I add you on that we have seen a drastic increase over the last month, in particular, in farm attacks and in murders. For example, the past week we had 4 instances of farm murders in South Africa.
So far this year, 77 farm attacks. I made a little bit of research for context. As of December 2, 2025, official South African police reports would indicate that 23 law enforcement officers, primarily SAPS members, had been murdered in South Africa from January 1 to now. That's double the number of farm murders in South Africa. So I'm trying to get an, we talk about crime against humanity here, and it feels almost vulgar to talk about these numbers. It feels, unethical to talk about these numbers in this term. But this is what you are going to be confronted with at the end of the day, from the other side that would argue to that farm murders is in a lot of ways no different from regular murders in South Africa.
Well, I think we should distinguish between the murders on SAPS members and those against civilians, because crimes against humanity concern civilians in particular. It is understandable that combating crime by the South African Police Service would reflect a fairly disproportionate level or number of murders in the law enforcement agencies, because crime in South Africa is, well, I think we could put it technically and bluntly, is out of hand and beyond control. South Africa's crime rates are well beyond the average of, I would think, at least 70 or 80% of the countries in the international community. So crime rates are very high. But when we talk about assaults and attacks on the farming community, we talk about crime that has a specific profile, specific features, a specific identity. And that makes it an area that not only from a humanitarian perspective is highly problematic, but also economic loss and impact that it has on South Africa's ability to produce food and all the other implications that result from this.
Yeah, yeah. I hear what you say, Professor Raath, and I want to say this to you, and I want to say this to every single listener who I know are throwing stones at me for questioning these things. I have interviewed 5, 6, 7 families from farms who had been affected by either murder or some vicious and violent attack. I interviewed recently Heidi Taljaard from the Hartswater case. She's just recently written her book about it, and told the story of Dan and Brechi and their sister who were brutally killed and tortured. I'm much aware of that. I spoke about 4 or 5 weeks ago to a farmer, Leon, somebody, I don't have his surname on the tip of my tongue now, who just about throughout the entire interview cried his heart out on camera, telling me about this horrific stuff, telling me in gruesome detail about what is happening on South African farms. So I want to make it sure that you know, and everybody else who's listening to this, is that I am extremely aware of the enormous pain that is caused by crimes on South African farms. But when we talk about a civil case against the South African government, or eventually going to international courts or whatever the case might be for crimes against humanity, then these are the hard statistical facts that will be thrown at you and that we need to discuss honestly and have to discuss. We are not able to avoid them. I want to give you another piece of statistic that I just got right now. over the past 35 years, between 1990 and 2024, the TAU South Africa, I guess the Transvaal Agricultural Union, recorded 2,295 farm murders, of which 88% were white and 12% were black. But in the last 2 years, and I think much prompted also the last couple of months prompted by Trump's genocide claims in South Africa, the South African police services did a statistical recording of the racial breakdowns of violence on South African farms. And this is the picture that they give me. They flip the picture. They show an image to the world that's showing that black workers and farm dwellers, and I make note of the farm dwellers, now make up 80 to 90% of the victims on South African farms. I'll give you an example. 11 out of 12, that's 92% black in late 24. 5 or 6, that's 83% black in early 25, with no further quarterly racial data released as of December 2025. Now, I wrote it down here for myself. This aligns with the experts in South Africa from the Institute for Security Studies, noting SAP's data interruption since 2007 led to what they call inconsistent rural crime tracking, but the 2025 figures are based on verifiable incident reports, not fabrication. That paints a whole different picture on all of this. Then I want to just touch on the nature of these crimes. Let me say once again to you, I sat in a camera and I looked Heidi Taljaard in the eyes. I sat in the camera and looked other victims of vicious crimes in the eyes. But people will say to you, scientists will say to you, that the nature of these crimes equals very often the nature of other crimes in urban areas in South Africa. I got the example of Anina Boysens, a 17-year-old girl from Bredasdorp some time ago. I make the reference of the post office murder. Make references to the fact that South Africa's third quarter crime statistics for 2024-2025, covering October to December, will show 389 murders, about 5% of the nation's 6,953 total killings that were attributed to mob justice, vigilantes, including brutal acts like necklacing. They're still necklacing people in South Africa. That's part of the picture. So how do you respond to that?
Johan, I think there are three important things we must note. First of all, I would suggest that we also, in one of your future programs, take this up with our statistician at the Transvaal Agricultural Union, who has kept this database since 1990. May I add that there are discrepancies between the official numbers, statistics, kept by the Agricultural Union from those kept by and maintained by the security institutions, for example, SAPS and so forth. We must also note that and I don't say that they are not correct, but I will only believe or take as authoritative those numbers from government sources once they've been thoroughly verified. For example, earlier this year, just after President Trump's remarks on farm murders, there were efforts by the Department of Police under the guidance of the minister to reformulate the definition or to change the definition of what a farm murder is. In other words, to smooth this out and to also make it appear as if it is just one of the outcrops of violent crime that normally occurs in the South African crime context. And I think that is a dangerous thing to do, because from 1990 there was a clear commitment to take to gather the information regarding farm attacks in particular, because of this, what we call under international law the contextual element
Which means?
Of crimes against humanity.
Yeah, could you
The
explain?
contextual element. And the contextual element is what distinguishes these crimes from other crimes. So it's not only a matter of statistics, but also the nature of these crimes. And may I add that we have over the last few months seen an increase in brutal attacks on particularly elderly civilians, and it is sad to say this. It also it also implies that from time to time workers, domestic workers, also farm workers, are also the victims of these attacks. But the main focus and the main aim of these attacks are mainly directed at the white farming civilians. And in the process, in order to accomplish their aims, the criminals also cause harm to domestic workers and other people that are there incidentally, or who work on the farm, or who visit there. So
Yeah.
that is the natural or the logical consequence, because in many instances, indiscriminately, people are attacked, and the aim is to accomplish their quest by eliminating the owners on the farm.
Yeah.
So I would say one has to bear that in mind. So the contextual element cannot be left from view when we talk about crimes against humanity and farm murders as one of the rubrics, or one of the clear, let's say, examples of these crimes perpetrated against civilians in the rural areas.
You referred to when they commit these crimes. Can you help me define the they that you're talking about? And most importantly, not only, let's forget about what motivates them, whether it's just pure crime or not. Are there any evidence? Are there anything that points to figures behind the they that you're talking about? Then I go back to what the Charter says itself, what the legal definition of crimes against humanity itself says: when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. That's what you are in fact saying. That is what the South African government is doing. That's why you want to take them to court. Where's the evidence? What evidence do we have? Are they, because I've not come across any such evidence anywhere.
In other words, Johan, that you question the issue as to whether these farm murders are perpetrated by government officials or from government sources.
What I'm saying, Professor, is who are the forces? Because that's what we hear. This is politically motivated. Some people will theorize and say, well, it's to create fear in the hearts of the farmers so that they can leave their land and they can claim the land back. And this is the stuff that we talk around the kitchen table, that we say to each other around the braai vleis, around the barbecue. Who are the they behind the they? Who are the forces behind these perpetrators, in your view, then, in terms of what you're suggesting to us today, and why ultimately you say that the South African government is responsible for this?
The the perpetrators of these crimes associate themselves, emotionally and otherwise, with a particular sentiment that is clearly anti-humanitarian, anti-white in most of the instances, and that have a distinct ideological flavor because of what I've referred to earlier on, the brutal way in which these murders are executed without any material or significant gain for the perpetrators. Mm-hmm. So one has to take all these instances into account in order to determine whether there is a systematic onslaught on farm owners. And I think there are clear indications that we can say that there is a systematic onslaught. And this does not necessarily mean that this systematic onslaught is perpetrated by a leader here or a gangster there or a politician or whomever, but that there is a broad culture of victimization and a broad culture of focusing on particular people, namely white farmers, and also, as I've explained earlier, also drawing into their attacks innocent people that would not normally be their main aim. Some of these instances may be more focused on stealing or having access to firearms or whatever the case may be. But the point is that the contextual element we have in farm murders show a distinct profile, and that profile has distinct features.
Explain to me, what do you mean with that? Explain to me, you use the word ideological flavor now. That's the characteristic or the flavor that you give that. What is that ideological flavor? And how do you measure it? And where are your data that you can show us that you've measured it?
Johan, I've explained right at the beginning that we must also take into account the whole issue of racial persecution. Farm murders is one instance or one category or one rubric of a broader phenomenon of anti-white sentiments that are fueled by government policy. We mustn't forget that farm murders are only incidents that occur within a particular political, social, and economic context. And that context is anti-humanitarian onslaughts on people that form a distinct minority. They are being targeted by government policies with or through race-based laws. They are targeted by government policies marginalizing a particular segment of the population. And these farm murders are more prevalent in those, and the victims are those mostly in those categories of this minority. So racial persecution take on many forms. I personally am of the opinion that under the Rome Statute, we can more easily prove racial persecution on a fairly high level, and that the farm murders, I think, are fueled by a broad sentiment that we could call anti-white, or let's say discrimination against the white minority, and where the idea is cultivated that some people are more equal than others, or that the lives of some people are worth more than the lives of others. In other words, that we have a perspective in the minds of particularly the criminal elements, that some people are not really that important for and qualify for protection to the same extent as other groups under the South African Constitution.
Has there been, since we've tracked these things, let's say since 1994, in any court case around farm murders, been evidence that's been put on the table that would point us towards the ideological flavor from the perpetrator? Do we have evidence on paper from a court of law action where the evidence clearly points that this particular person who attacked this particular farmer or killed this particular farmer, that his attack had been racially motivated or motivated by, now if you want to go that far again, Julius Malema's song, that's not been the case, but that you actually have physical evidence for what you've just said now?
Yes, I think we should make three observations. The first is that the association of some of these perpetrators or criminals with the song "Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer," that has surfaced in quite a few instances. Also, the instance or the example of the graffiti to which I referred earlier, that is a clear manifestation of a particular ideological commitment. And then thirdly, I think Johan, we must, with most crimes against humanity or humanitarian conduct, one must take the whole context into consideration. And that context is, or sends out a message of anti-whiteness, or the fact that minorities are actually a stumbling block or are in the way of reforms that could lead to more equal distribution of property or equal distribution of resources. So there's a policy environment that is conducive to this sort of thing. That is now the last point I would like to mention in this regard, namely that farm murders cannot be separated from other clear manifestations of racial persecution, and that these various forms of racial persecution, I think, will in many of these instances of farm murders be supported by conduct or by policy decisions that had an indirect effect on the decision of criminals to pursue these avenues and to commit these crimes in the rural community. So I think the whole context is very anti-minority groups in our country at the moment.
Yeah. But you're not saying to me, Professor, am I to read from that what you're saying is that the discriminatory laws of black economic empowerment that might have an effect on the action of some cruel perpetrator who had attacked a farmer? That's not what you're saying to me.
No, but it could be relevant because
in what sense? How does the and I'm with you all and with every single South African. I think black economic empowerment must be stopped, and it must end now. I agree fully with that. So there's no argument in my head. But how does that inform the actions of a farm killer?
Johan, the farm killings in South Africa cannot be isolated from what happened in Southern Africa, and I'm referring to Zimbabwe, for example, where clearly the same lines were cultivated by policymakers who created the impression that the white minority or minorities are the main stumbling blocks in accomplishing the aims, the economic aims that they were pursuing. For example, and now one must take this into consideration as well, namely remarks by senior politicians in our government, and the documented example of a president of a country, South Africa, by name, Ramaphosa, alluding or using the metaphor of the boiling frog, and thereby conveying the message that the actions against the white minority in South Africa should take on the form of a more prolonged process rather than solving the issues immediately, or reverting to more extreme forms of action against them immediately. The impressions created by, for example, ANC politicians who take part in singing "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer," and the ANC-led government also formulating the policies having an impact in the economic sphere and so forth, discriminating against white people and other minorities. That creates an impression in the minds of people who use the system also for their own benefit and for their own views. So one mustn't forget that farm murders is not the only incidence or example of humanitarian impacts on humanitarian values in South Africa. Farm murders form part of a broad spectrum of racial persecutions that are directly or indirectly linked to one another.
I want to just share with you a summary that I made of South African criminologists and sociologists and trauma researchers on how do they read all of this? How do they interpret, in particular, the brutality of these murders that we're talking about, or these attacks that we're talking about, and what they call, and I think South African police might use as the reference as well, what they call the overkill in South Africa, the particular nastiness of these cases. This is what they say. South African criminologists, sociologists, trauma researchers consistently attribute the extreme brutality and overkill in many murders, including prolonged torture and mutilation, to a toxic combination of historical trauma from apartheid-era violence, extreme inequality, widespread poverty and unemployment, a pervasive culture of toxic masculinity and impunity, high levels of substance abuse, especially alcohol, as we know, serious drugs taken, muti, whatever they call it, and a deeply eroded trust in the criminal justice system that normalizes vengeance and dehumanization of victims. You're gonna admit that if you look at that objectively, that it does make a lot of sense if you see it within that broader context. You begin to unravel, you begin to understand the fabric of these things.
Johan, yes, and of course, to add to that, if the example of criminality is actually set by the people leading this country, and the people that are in most senior positions, politicians, members of cabinet, and senior members of state departments, setting this bad example, as we see now with a commission underway investigating the criminal acts of officials. And the example that they set, I think, is most conducive to furthering this broad culture of lawlessness that is pervasive of our country.
I think what you're saying to me, and correct me if I say it wrong, is I get the impression you're saying to me is that government itself, then government meaning African National Congress, the African National Congress leadership themselves, sort of setting a tone in South Africa that allows all of this evil to kind of flourish in South Africa. They set racial laws in South Africa. They create an atmosphere in which these discriminatory practices can happen. Am I correct if that's the way I interpret what you're saying?
Yes, and to add to that, we have what was once described in 1997 as probably one of the most forward-looking constitutions in the world, has become in many respects just a paper without any real effect and any real benefit to the people that are governed under this constitution.
A lot of people will say to you, or let me rather ask you this question. I think you've said it before. Am I right to deduce from what you said to me that you believe that there is not a full-scale genocide in South Africa going on, but you believe that it's moving in the direction of a genocide? Am I interpreting you correct?
Johan, yes, and I may emphasize that I think it is clear that we have clear profiles of racial persecution and low-keyed or, let's say, prolonged forms of genocidal acts that show an increase. In other words, that the racial persecutions could become, in the near future, fully fledged genocidal activities.
So are you then saying to me? I just spoke to Jaco Kleinhans a couple of days ago from Solidarity, and he said to me, "Let me state this again clearly: there is no genocide going on in South Africa, and we've never said so to Trump." Are you saying to me that Jaco hasn't quite got it right? In fact, there is this low boiling genocide that is incremental in nature, and we are on stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the case might be.
You see, Johan, we must be very careful not to fall into the trap of a false dilemma. In other words, this fruitless debate as to whether we have a genocide or not. Mm-hmm. Equally severe is the issue or the manifestation of racial persecution. And I'm now referring to Article 7 of the Rome Statute, paragraph H, and permit me to read it to you. Persecution against any identifiable group or collectivity on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, as defined in paragraph 3, or other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law in connection with any act referred to in this paragraph or any crime within the jurisdiction of the court. And that is a very, very severe and a very heavy issue. It is a crime against humanity on its own, whilst genocide is dealt with in Article 6 of the Rome Statute. So we mustn't fall into this fruitless debate as to whether there's a genocide or not, because to determine whether there is a genocide is a very difficult thing to measure. But to my mind, we have clear instances of racial persecution that in some instances amount to genocidal activities.
Just one or two short questions. I get a clear picture. Let me ask you a question that I was going to say is just for fun, but that would be too ironic for words. But is it not deeply ironic, you're an intellectual, you're an academic, that the very government you plan to sue for crimes against humanity has in fact, however controversial it might be, recently sued Israel at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, for violations of the 1948 Genocide Convention?
Mhm. Yes, and just after entering as signatory number 23 of the Rome Statute, a law was passed to make effect, to make the Rome Statute effective in our country. And as you rightly say, highly ironic that that same government is in the forefront of those responsible for these racially motivated and discriminatory actions that we are experiencing in our country at the moment.
Please permit me this question. Do you think there is, in fact, a genocide going on in Israel?
You see, this is a very complex issue. I think there are clear elements present, but of course the level of proof is fairly high because genocide is a technical crime, meaning that you have to prove 4 core elements, and to prove those elements are not that easy. That's why I'm also reluctant to say that we are experiencing a fully fledged genocide in our own country at the moment. But there are clear indications that there are genocidal elements present in the activities of Israel.
Yeah. I understand how difficult it is to prove that. I understand how high the bar is. My question is more just aimed at your social political mind. Do you believe there's a genocide going on in Israel? I'm not asking you whether you can prove it. I'm not asking whether it will ever be proven. I'm just saying, do you believe it just what you observe, what you see, what you smell? Do you believe there's a genocide going on in Israel?
No, I don't think there is. I think it comes close in certain respects, but not all the elements of a genocide, I think, can be proved. So from a technical, juridical point of view, I don't think that there is, legally speaking, a genocide taking place.
Do you objectively believe that, and I go back to crimes against humanity that rescue South Africa and the very good people that are sitting today will be able to really get this to court, to get a judge to listen to your case and to get a verdict at the end of the day?
Johan, yes, of course, we must also note that in order to take a case to court, a lot of preparation is needed, a lot of expertise, hard work, a lot of time goes into it. But that is the aim to which we are working. And I wouldn't have been supportive of this if I had doubt in my mind as to whether we could be successful. So I think we have progressed quite remarkably so in the last couple of weeks, because it's a very hectic time for most of the lawyers and other professional people. And in spite of that, we have gathered, I think, the evidence, a lot of evidence. We have, I think, identified the core issues. And I think within the next, or the first 3 months of the new year, I think we would be in a position where we will be able to approach a court.
Yeah, just technical questions, Professor. Where do you sue? Do you take this straight to the international? You don't take this to the International Criminal Court, but you take it to the Constitutional Court. Where do you sue?
Yes, no. In the first instance, this is an issue that we will be taking up with the courts in the South African jurisdiction, in other words, South African courts. And depending on the outcome there, we will then decide as to whether it would be taken to the ICC. But in the first instance, we will approach the South African court.
And in your view, do you have at hand ready today the resources, the manpower, the money? This is going to be a tough one.
Yes, that of course is a second issue. The merits of the case on the one hand, and on the other hand, the resources. And we call upon all our donors and supporters supporting the initiatives of Rescue South Africa, Civil Rights Alliance, to contribute to make this possible. We think, well, more than that, I think we are fairly sure that we will have the necessary resources in the early in the coming year.
Skeptics are saying that this is a lot of political theatre and nothing more than political theatre. Are the skeptics, do they have a point? How do you convince the skeptics of this? And I guess my question is also, when I go out there on a public platform and I say, well, this is it, South Africa viewers, Rescue South Africa is suing the South African government for crimes against humanity. That's a huge statement to make to the public out there. And I've seen in the first program the reaction of the public. And am I correct if I bring it to my public like that? That this is in fact a case of crimes against humanity that you will be bringing to the South African courts?
Johan, yes. The phenomenon of farm murders needs to be taken to the courts under the broad heading of crimes against humanity. Secondly, the professional people involved in Rescue South Africa, Civil Rights Alliance, their qualifications, their expertise, and their professional abilities and commitment speak for themselves. You won't find people politically motivated in the first instance there. You will find professional people whose life work and whose professional contributions are beyond any doubt.
Yeah. I might note that I spoke to Millie Wesley, who is on that team, and we all now know who Millie Wesley is today, the woman who successfully taken Julius Malema to court, somebody to take obviously very, very seriously, and somebody that I have deep respect for. I will put on at the end of this program the faces and the names of the professionals that are connected to. These are all very highly regarded people. I just have a little bit of a struggle with the framing of all of this, crimes against humanity. And I'm going to close. This will be my last question. I promise you that. I want to close with this puzzle in my own head. The public framing of this case, Rescue South Africa suing the South African government for crimes against humanity and all that means and it implies, and the emotional reactions that it gets. If this is in fact what you are doing as Rescue South Africa, then I guess the question would be, why is the entire South African press corps not all over this at the moment? This is my second interview on the subject. Why does Rescue South Africa not call a national press conference to bring this to the entire public? And once again, my apologies for asking what seems to be feels for myself personally a cynical question.
Johan, yes, the official launching of Rescue South Africa Civil Rights Alliance was only accomplished within the last month. So I think the public notice and appreciation for what the Civil Rights Alliance stand for, that will come with time. But of course, we need to make available the information needed for people to buy into the projects that we are launching, to support us, to realize that pursuing the legal avenues in furthering the aims of the alliance are of primary importance. So that will come with time. We haven't been around that long officially to have accomplished all of that. So I think within the short period of time that we are operating, we have made I think we've made an impact on the public conscience, and we've been taken note of.
Yeah. My very last question, Professor Raath, I guess that you and I are more or less the same age. If you don't mind me asking this, this must be the case of your life. This must be, and I'm sure you're a deeply respected man with a tremendous record. This must be the case of your life.
Johan, yes. I think that is the most important project that have crossed my way the last 20 years. Having practiced as an advocate, having lectured at 3 or 4 universities, also involved in the drafting of the final constitution, involved in the proceedings of the Constitutional Assembly, theme committees. I think this is the case or the project that I would like to make a contribution to and to see through in my career.
Well, I want to thank you and Millie Wesley and Errol Naidu for sharing this with me. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. I wish you all the best of luck, and I hope that our paths will cross again. Professor Andries Raath, board member of the Rescue South Africa Civil Rights Alliance. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Johan. Thanking you for having me. Thank you, and have a good evening.